Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. Please subscribe and keep watching more details. Julie Chrisley punished for complaining too much in prison. Julie Chrisley's status with the Bureau of Prisons has been listed as not in custody for a few weeks now. Many people believe this is because the Chrisley Knows Best star is being transported for her upcoming sentencing hearing. However, fans think that her longer travel time is due to her behavior behind bars. Here is what they're saying. Is Julie Chrisley being punished with slow transfer? There has been some speculation about where Julie Chrisley is since she has been listed as not in BOP custody. The reality TV star needs to be relocated to Atlanta for her upcoming hearing. It could take a day or two to transfer her to a new facility, but it seems like Julie has been in limbo for a while now. A Chrisley Knows Best fan pointed out that prisons typically put people through weeks of travel in the system because of how they act. One Reddit user posted about Julie Chrisley's 3+ weeks of being transported. They said that a podcaster who is a felon has recently talked about the transfer process. Most of it is a rather miserable experience. There is no entertainment, no access to a phone, and you have to be cuffed the entire time. Even if you only had to travel 100 miles, the warden might choose a route that would have you pinballing across the country. Every night, the prisoners have to check into a new location. The Reddit user said that the felon podcaster claimed it was the warden's favorite thing to do if an inmate was complaining a lot. So someone like Julie Chrisley could be put through a slow transfer to wherever she needed to be. I have a feeling Julie is not having a good few weeks as she's moved to Atlanta for the hearing, the person concluded the post. Chrisley Knows Best star to appear in court this month. Others were quick to chime in with their thoughts. One person claimed the slow transfer was the worst punishment any inmate could have. They call it diesel therapy, and it is every bit as bad as you've ever heard it was. Another person pointed out it isn't uncommon for inmates to have several layovers on their way to where they need to be. A third person chastised Julie. The amount of complaining and blame shifting along with lack of any remorse by these cretins is exactly why Julie is taking the long route. Todd and Julie Chrisley were found guilty of tax evasion and bank fraud in 2022. Julie was sentenced to 7 years in prison, and Todd received 12. The couple reported for their prison terms in January 2023, and in September their sentences were reduced. Todd's reduced sentence will bring him home 2 years earlier, and Julie's sentence was reduced by 14 months. The Chrisley Knows Best star's sentence was then vacated in July. It was determined that there wasn't sufficient evidence to claim that Julie was aware of the fraud prior to 2007. Julie Chrisley had always lived a life of luxury. Known for her role in the reality TV show Chrisley Knows Best, she was once the queen of her home, running things as smoothly as the manicured lawns of her grand estates. But those estates had long since vanished, replaced with the cold, unforgiving walls of federal prison. This was no Hollywood set, no perfectly staged scene. This was reality, and it was harsher than Julie had ever imagined. Her life had changed drastically since she and her husband, Todd Chrisley, had been convicted of tax evasion and fraud. Once revered for their picture-perfect lives and snappy quips, they had fallen from grace faster than Julie had fallen in love with designer handbags. Now, she had traded her luxurious wardrobe for a drab prison uniform, and her world of perfectly curated Instagram posts for a life under lock and key. At first, Julie tried to adapt. She kept her head down, hoping to serve her time without too much fuss. She knew this wasn't the life she wanted, but she'd make the best of it. After all, wasn't that what she always did? In the face of stress or adversity, Julie could always rely on her charm, her wit, and her relentless drive for perfection. But prison didn't care about charm, or wit, or designer handbags. The days dragged on, each one bleaker than the last. The noise, the lack of privacy, the constant rules, all of it began to wear on Julie. She wasn't used to following orders, and the lack of control over her surroundings grated on her more than she anticipated. Soon enough, the complaints started to pile up like bills after a shopping spree. Julie's voice, once so polished and refined, began to take on a different tone, a sharper, more desperate edge. "This food is inedible," she would grumble to anyone who would listen, poking at her tray with disdain. How do they expect us to survive on this slop? It's freezing in here. Do they not believe in heating? She muttered, wrapping her arms around herself in a pitiful attempt to stay warm. I wouldn't even let my worst enemy live in these conditions. Her grievances spilled over into every aspect of prison life. The mattress was too thin, the light was too harsh, the guards were too strict. Nothing was ever quite right for Julie, and it seemed like every day a new complaint emerged. It didn't take long for the other inmates to grow tired of her constant whining. To them this was life, harsh and unrelenting, but life nonetheless. To Julie it was an unbearable nightmare, one that she vocalized at every turn. The guards too began to notice. Julie was becoming notorious for her complaints, her dissatisfaction ringing out through the halls. At first they dismissed it. After all, wasn't every inmate unhappy? But Julie's grievances went beyond the usual frustrations. She demanded special treatment, expected conditions to magically improve just because she was Julie Chrisley, reality TV star and former queen of Southern charm. But reality, it seemed, had other plans for Julie. One day, after yet another outburst over the quality of the cafeteria food, Julie was summoned to the warden's office. She tried to compose herself as she entered, but the tension in the air was palpable. "Mrs. Chrisley," the warden began, his voice low and firm, "I've heard you've been having some difficulties adjusting to life here." Julie raised her chin defiantly. "I'm not asking for much," she said, her voice laced with frustration. "Just a little bit of basic human decency. The conditions here are appalling." The warden's expression remained unmoved. "I understand this is a difficult transition for you, but this is a federal facility, not a five-star hotel. Complaints are part of the process, but there's a limit." "A limit?" Julie's eyes narrowed. "I'm simply voicing legitimate concerns. You can't expect anyone to live like this." The warden leaned forward, his gaze steady. "Mrs. Chrisley, I've heard about the thin mattress, the cold temperatures, the food. These are not unique complaints. But your constant disruptions are becoming a problem." Julie crossed her arms, refusing to back down. "I just want things to be bearable." "There are consequences for excessive complaints," the warden said, his tone now colder. "We've tried to be lenient, but if you continue, there will be punishment." Punishment. The word hung in the air like a storm cloud ready to burst. Julie blinked, momentarily stunned. Punishment for speaking her mind? "What kind of punishment?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Solitary confinement," the warden said simply. "If the complaints don't stop, that's where you'll be headed." Julie felt a cold rush of panic. Solitary confinement, the thought of being locked away in a small, windowless room with no one to talk to, no one to listen to her complaints, was more terrifying than anything else. She'd heard the stories, seen the documentaries. Solitary confinement could break a person. But you can't," she started, but the warden cut her off. "You're not above the rules here, Mrs. Chrisley. You need to understand that." Julie stared at him, the weight of the situation sinking in. She had spent her life bending the rules, finding ways around them, charming her way out of consequences. But here in this place there was no bending, no charm, no escape. She was just another inmate, subject to the same rules as everyone else. For the first time since her imprisonment, Julie felt truly helpless. She had always been in control, always able to navigate her way through life's difficulties. But now that control was gone, slipping through her fingers like sand, and all that was left was the cold, hard reality of prison life. Julie walked back to her cell, her mind racing. She could feel the eyes of the other inmates on her, their judgment palpable. She had become the center of attention, but not in the way she was used to. Here, her complaints had made her an outcast, a nuisance, someone to be avoided. And now they had led her to the brink of punishment. As she lay on her thin mattress that night, staring up at the harsh, fluorescent light, Julie realized that prison wasn't just about serving time. It was about survival. And if she wanted to make it through, she would have to change. Complaining, it seemed, wouldn't get her out of this one. The next day, Julie kept her mouth shut.